Welcome to the Feeds webinar. My name is Dhiraj Sharma from the Feeds operations team, and I'll be taking you through the tips and tricks of maintaining feeds. Before we get started, some information around the webinar. A recorded version will be available on the class website. A detailed handout is also available part of the initial email that was sent you, so that can be downloaded later to go into the steps I'll be talking about in the webinar today. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar, and I will try to answer the most frequently asked. Having said that, a copy of the question and answers will also be available at the end. Please complete the survey for feedback purposes, and we'd love to hear from you. I have a couple of poll questions. First one would be appearing on your screen in a second, just for a better understanding of feeds, and the result of the poll would also be provided to you after. For which product can history be requested from the feed console in class? Hub 2.4, McQuery wrap, all of the above, or none of the above. Some of you may or may not be aware of a functionality through class that talks about going into the feed console and requesting history. In most cases, we get this question asked, and thus it's been asked here, and I'll be talking about this in detail later. We'll give it 10 more seconds before we move on. Thanks for that. Okay, let's get started. The agenda for today is purely around the authority process for feeds, some unique feed setups, data inaccuracies and how to troubleshoot them in class, and lastly, follow-up. As you're aware, we have a lot of products supported by feeds in class, and I'll be using examples for most frequently asked questions in the last 2 months. Let's get started. When setting up a feed, it's important to know the type of feed that you are setting up. Simply put, there are 3 types of feeds in class: bank, broker, and platform. Each have a unique authority type. So let's talk about checkpoints prior to authorization. Most importantly, how to choose a product. So you've identified which feed to set up. So you're setting up a broker, for instance, and you're unsure what product it is because you don't have a statement handy. So starting point could be entering the name in the user guide in the search option up here and see if you get a hit. If not, if you're aware of the product, so for instance, I've used Colonial First Aid as an example. They have a lot of white labels which you may not be aware of. That's why I'm sharing this here. And if you click onto any one of the products, of course, it takes you into the details of how to set up this white label for CFS. Similarly, we have McQuery, which can be confusing at times to select the correct process to set up a McQuery product because there are so many available in the market. So this page here talks about in detail what the account number should be to be entered in class for an activation purpose. And also I strongly suggest, if you come across a product which you think should be added to the user guide or is confusing for you, feel free to raise a feed support request and we'd be happy to add that there. I'm just using these 2 examples because, like I said, they're the most commonly asked. And a lot of times I get asked, why don't we simplify the process? Short answer, we don't control the process. The providers do, and we follow them. Having said that, we try our best to streamline processes for convenience and provide useful tools like these in the user guide. Okay, let's move on. Another common question that get asked is around the cash transaction not loading for a broker or a platform feed. So most broker feeds do not support bank accounts with some exceptions. And on the other hand, most platform feeds support bank accounts with some exceptions. To give you a specific example, I'll go into fund setup for demoing purposes. Asgard is a platform feed. It supports cache, so you need to be linking it here. Similarly, ComSec is not, so you should not be linking a bank account. Now, where do I find this information? In this instance, I know these are the two specific ones because they are commonly raised queries, but if you were new to the system or you're not aware of a product that's available in class or not, you go into the data feeds overview page. All these links used in the presentation would be shared with you later and are also part of the handout, so don't worry about saving them at this stage. And if there are any others you require, we'd be happy to assist. This page here talks about all the bank and cash accounts that are supported for a feed in class. Similarly, platform, wraps and SMA accounts, and your brokers. So answer to your question, where do I find this information? Go into the data feeds overview page and you can always get the information, what's supported or not. Okay, so when a feed is activated by provider and you don't get any data through, what does that mean? Normally when a feed is activated by provider and that status is updated in class, it's a status that is provided to us by the provider. Okay, when a feed is activated by provider and it has a status in class that it's been activated by provider and you're not getting any data through, what does that mean? Normally when we have an activated by provider status in class, it's the provider giving us that information and it loads through class because that's what they've told us. And in an ideal situation, you should expect the feed to flow through and the data and the status changing onto okay in a couple of days. However, some providers flag an account as activated, but the data is never sent to class. In those instances, it's an error status sent to us, and it happens a lot. We've been told every time we ask them that why has it happened, we've been told it's the volume and sometimes human error. They try their best not to send us incorrect statuses, but it can happen. In reality, the actual account had some issues, and due to an approval process across providers' teams, or they may have a setup process within their teams and that did not get followed properly by them. In such scenarios, all we need to do is contact the provider and request the reason. So as soon as you find an activated by provider account and it's been 2 days, raise a ticket with us and we'll follow it up for you. What account types are not supported for a feed? Again, I'll take you back to this page, which talks about in detail as to what's supported or not. So for instance, you have an Adelaide Bank loan account, which you want to be sure of it's supported or not. It's not. This page suggests it. You can always go into the details of the page by clicking onto Adelaide Bank or searching the specific product. Is say Bank of Queensland, because that's a very commonly asked question. So I've used that as in my example. If you scroll down, this bit here clearly suggests what's supported and what's not supported. Now, BSBs ending with 200 are managed by BOQ specialists and are not supported. Now, a lot of times you may not read this. That is why I always recommend or suggest whenever you're setting up a feed, click on the help on this automated feed and go through the process just in case. It saves you time, because in this case, you try to activate a feed with the general instructions thinking a Bank of Queensland is supported. I've used it before in another account without realizing that this is an account ending with 200. You wait 10 business days, raise a follow-up with us, and realize that you've wasted 10 business days where you could have started manually loading it and the feed is not available for it. Another very common example is ANZ. BSB 012012 is not supported. So if I was to go in here, and under the FAQs, it talks about which accounts are supported or not. Now, another good example is ANZ share investing that does not support a bank account. It's a recent change, which is why we always recommend going into the actual product and searching if it supports statements or not. So if I was to go into ANZ share investing, the feed does not support transaction for any cash account. This is a very recent change to this product, and that's why I always suggest administrators to go into the help on this automated link, even though you are very familiar with the process, and check for recent updates. It's our attempt, or we always try our best to update these user guide pages. A lot of times it's you suggesting us of changes to a certain type of product, because it's sometimes hard to keep a tab on, or the provider decides not to inform us. It's always helpful if you come across something unique, please raise it with us. Moving on, setups. How to link multiple cash accounts. So let's deep dive into the unique setups. So starting with the generic setups. If I go into the fund again, let me just close these extra tabs and use NapTrade as an example. So I'm in the fund level, feeds console, click onto the product I'm trying to set up. A common mistake we often make when trying to enter these unique codes is we don't select the bank account and raise it with the feed support team saying there's a bug on my feed console screen. It's not letting me put in the investment code. I know where to put it, but I can't put it. It's purely because you have not selected the bank account. Once you do, that's where you put the codes in. Now, where do I find that code if I'm not aware of what the code should be? Because it may not be on the statement. You click on help on this automated feed and see NapTrade subaccounts. Now, these are generic codes. Sometimes a code is available on the statement. For instance, Crestone, they provide the codes on the statement, and Premium is another example. I've seen it on a Premium statement that the second bank account code is available on the statement, and all you need to do is follow the instructions and enter the code in. I'll use another example for unique codes where you may not be aware of what the code is, and we could assist you on that. So let's go into Asgard as a setup. So say you've put in your standard Asgard setup, your account number has been put in. Scroll down, you've selected a bank account, you've put in all the investments. Now you look at a statement, or you realize that all the trading information is missing, and it's also available on your portfolio. However, it's not loading through class. In that case, please provide us a copy of that statement, raise a feed support ticket, and we'd be happy to assist you on that. What do you need to do? We go through the authority process. Of course, we need your confirmation on it to go ahead with it, to be able to access files and its client information. So there's a process for it. Once we have the account number with us, we provide you the extra account number details. All you need to do is then go into class, either go new broker or platform feed, or I've set one up here, another Asgard ERAP account. I've called it subcash because that's the second bank account you've identified. Only select the bank account in that feed and put the account number which has been provided to you from class. So the original account stays with the investments and the bank account. The second bank account you identified can be set up again with the account number we've provided you by linking the cash account. Now goes into consideration that the bank account has already been created. Okay, so how to set up an advisor. It's a very basic step in class, but it's often missed. A lot of time your understanding of setting up a feed in class is going into the Asgard setup again. You've put in all the information. Set up Asgard class advisor and hit save. Now You send all the instructions to the advisor saying that we need to get a feed activated in class, and these are the instructions to follow, and they do it as part of the authority process. But an important step that gets missed is going on to the business level. Contacts, selecting Mr. Class Advisor, going to authorities and entering in the advisor code. If you do not enter the correct advisor code, the feed is not going to work, even though the advisor's gone through the authority process and activated for you. Now, where do you find the advisor code? There's a user guide link that will be provided at the end. You can go in there and always check the advisor code. It's also available on the statement for you. When you get a statement from the client or from the advisor, a lot of instances the advisors know what the code is and they provide it to you, and you just need to enter it here and hit save, and the feed should work. Requesting history. So answer to the poll question was it's Hub24 and Macquarie that supports that request history functionality in class. Where do we go to access that screen? On the feed console in the fund level, if you click on Macquarie, request history. Now, often we get requests saying, are you able to request history for a Macquarie account? I'm unsure if I hit this button here, it's going to duplicate data or not. Now, in this specific example, it's picking up the fund on system date because it's a new fund for demoing purposes only. You may have a latest manual transaction date, which would be 6 months from now. All you need to check is, do you have a manual transaction in the system? Because transaction rules are also considered as manual transaction for requesting history purposes. So at that point, all you need to do is double check. If you're happy, you can overwrite the date and go back to the date you wish to request history. If accidentally you request history and transactions duplicate, you can always sort by date and delete those investments. But it's very rare for a Macquarie account or a Hub24 account to duplicate events because there's a unique transaction ID that goes into each transaction, and it would not duplicate. Now, another scenario of requesting history, if a feed supports history or not, can be checked on the user guide. So if I close this and go into a data feeds overview page, go into a broker, for instance. So a couple of scenarios. When you set up a feed, number one, providers give us historical data on inception. That's the most easiest one. You don't need to do anything. Number two, sometimes you need to be mindful that historical data is only provided only at the commencement of the feed. Why is this step important, or why do we sort of put it as a remark in here is, let's say you've set up the feed, but your setup is incorrect. In class, you forgot to put the advisor code in. So wherever you see history supported and it is only available at the commencement of the feed, please make sure the setup is correct by checking the advisor code, checking the if the authority form has been uploaded, if it's an account holder feed, making sure the account numbers are correct, because you may send the right information to the advisor activates it, we start getting data. However, the setup in class is incorrect. In that case, you will miss the history, and then it needs to be re-requested. It's just a longer wait. Sometimes feed providers take slightly longer in giving us that information. So it's very important we request history at the right stage. Third scenario is looking at when you're requesting history through checking the information here, and while activating the feed, you need to send an email to the provider saying, give us historical data, because by default, they do not give you historical data. That again is available in the user guide for you to check. Okay, let's move on. Data inaccuracies, or how to troubleshoot existing feeds issues in class. So it's important to understand why a feed is duplicated. It's important to understand why a feed is unbalanced. A lot of time a feed is unbalanced, or there's an investment balance that is incorrect. It's purely due to a corporate action. So all you need to do is action the corporate action that's available through the console, and everything works. Another example, which is often missed, a very simple step, is linking the investments. So let me show you in the feed console. Let's use this product I've set up here, Asgard. So you've got the top bit entering all the information, and when you scroll down in the holding accounts, you need to be selecting the investments that belong to that product. Now, just in case you miss linking these investments, it's going to duplicate and create an _1 for you. There's a very detailed user guide page that goes step by step how to fix it. And I'll very quickly at a high level show you how to fix it. So for instance, I've recognized feed which has a 0 balance, and it's got an _1 in there. Step 1, edit and put in a delete in the description. Follow this with all the _1 investments that you've identified has been created by the feed, and put in a delete. The reason why we do that is when you go into transactions and browse events and sort by account name, bear in mind this information is available in the user guide. You can always go select by deleted investments and then just remove them and remove that investment completely. Once you follow this step, go into feeds console, and select the right investment and not the _1. By selecting the right investment, you are reinstating which investment actually belongs to the feed and not the one which has been created through the feed, because that's a duplicate. Okay, feed is missing cash transactions under a broker or a platform. Now, before we get into the details of this, an important question you need to ask yourself is, does the product support cash, as mentioned earlier? If I'm looking at a broker, a ComSet account, have I incorrectly set it up? Identifying the feed product type is very important. If unsure, always raise a feed request with us, or search it in the user guide like I showed you earlier, to be able to understand if it supports the bank account or not. Because in some cases it's just a matter of fixing the setup. You already have the data in the background, and once you fix the setup, it's going to work. Alternatively, is it a bank account that needs to be linked? So it's an Asgard feed, like I mentioned to you earlier. All you need to do is link the bank account correctly, and the data will start flowing through. Or the third scenario is you need an independent authority type. So you've set up the ComSec with the assumption that the bank flows through, but it actually needs the bank account to be followed with the authority process. Also, checking the investment codes for cash, like I showed you earlier, is important. You may have entered for an app trade, for instance, like a 001 in the actual account number, and it's stopping the other accounts to feed through. Whenever in doubt, always go into the data feeds overview page, and you can get all the information here. If in case you don't have any specific accounts details not present on the user guide, like I said earlier, please raise it with us and we'd be more than happy to update it in the user guide and assist you with your query. Income has duplicated for a platform feed. For platform feeds, income data is available through the provider. Some providers, in unique circumstances, may be late in providing that information, that income. Say, for instance, you have a client coming in 2 days' time, and you realize that your bank reconciles with all the income events available. However, it's not been matched. It's still sitting as unmatched transactions because the income side is not available. At that point, you being an intelligent administrator, you go into transactions, match transactions, and go, I'll generate the income because I want my reports to be accurate for the client, and it's income. You want it to be reflecting correctly. You generate income and match it off. Now, for completeness purposes, at this point, the step that normally goes missing is feeds and feeds console, because at that point, you don't realize that this income may be available later through the provider. It would not have a unique transaction ID because you've used the class generate income functionality to generate the income. And at that point, you go into the product and just put in a do not load data date. The date you request the generate income, enter the do not load data date, so that at a later stage when that income becomes available, it's not going to duplicate for you. Let's say if you forget, it's a simple step of just removing the extra transactions or removing the ones you created and match off the ones which came through the feed. I always suggest putting in a do not load date, before date in there, so that it doesn't happen. And accidentally, let's say you put in a do not load before date and there's a transaction that should have come for the period, you can always remove it later, and that information will flow through. So to avoid duplication, please enter that date in, or once the client has left, remove the manually added transactions and wait for the data to flow through. Both works. It's fairly quick, but it's just it can be daunting at times when you've gone through fixing an account, bringing it up to date, and later realizing that information was available. Okay, it's time for the next poll question. So in a second, you'd be seeing another question pop up on your screen. So what do you need to do, or what happens when a feed status is activation overdue? You request a follow-up from the menu. You call the trustee that the feed is overdue, call support, or phone a friend for assistance. Normally when a feed is in activation overdue stage, a lot of times it's the setup that is incorrect, or you may have just forgotten to upload a form. I'll talk about this in details soon, and I'll also show you specific scenarios where it's something like a very basic step that went missing in terms of activating a feed, and that stopped the feed to load. Another 5 seconds. Thanks for that. So the right answer is request a follow-up from the menu. Having said that, whenever you come across an activation overdue, to save time and before raising a ticket with class by hitting that follow button and then again waiting, you can always check for setup related issues. For instance, I'm going to now show you a very unique example of accidentally putting in a date in the fund details. So fund details, and there's an end date next to the establishment deed date. A lot of times this happens when there are administrators checking each other's work, and they think, I'll put in an end date just in case the other administrator doesn't make change, and later they forget to remove that date. It can also happen when you are going in to update the on-system date, or for some reason you were on this screen and accidentally entered an end date and hit save. That just stops the feed. Now these are scenarios where a feed is active and you've missed put in this information and it's gone inactive. Another example is how I spoke about the do not load before date. You may accidentally put in a recent date thinking, you want to put that in because my fund is up to date, without realizing that there may be missing transactions, or there'd be updates to the income events which come in later and you don't see them. Another scenario is where your cache was working. So if I go into the feeds and feeds console, say for instance, you have a ComSec account and you have a ComBank account set up correctly in class. But when you went into the ComSec account, for some reason, you wanted to update the authority or you wanted to put in some information. And at that point, the general thought process is, oh, my ComBank is not supported. Or my ComBank's not linked here. I'm going to link it and hit save. At that point, yeah, you didn't realize that ComBank is actually supported independently outside and it is set up and it's feeding through correctly. But you go in and change the setup that would stop the feed. So all you need to do is untick and hit save, and the feed starts working again. Now, let's talk about when your feed has stopped and you've identified that it's an advisor feed that needs your attention. As a rule of thumb, I say whenever a feed stops or becomes no longer active, you should always look at a latest statement. If you don't have one handy, ask the question to the advisor before following it up. The reason for that is the advisor code may have changed, and when you ask that question, the advisor may just let you know that, yeah, the advisor code is updated, and I was going to inform you on that. See if the account is linked to the advisor you're following it up with after you've identified that you know who the advisor is, and check the setup. Check if there are any recent transactions or any movement on the account that confirms that it's an active account. For an account holder authority, again, look at the statement, see if the account number is valid or not, if you can identify it from the statement. Recent transactions, same rules. The difference between the two is when you're following up and it's an advisor feed, it's a quicker turnaround if you follow up with the advisor first and get an answer from the advisor if everything's fine or not. With an account holder, of course, we can follow it up for you, because when you raise an advisor related follow-up and we follow up with the providers, the answer we get is go back to the advisor. On an account holder, of course, we would get an answer because either you're authorized or the trustee is authorizing you on their behalf. If all of the above are fine, you have a recent statement that confirms it's all good, nothing changed, raise a request with us and we'd be happy to assist. Sometimes it's a change of brokers, so holdings have been transferred to a new platform, or the client decided that, okay, I'm going to choose a better product, and they had it in their mind to talk with you in the next meeting, which was scheduled, say, in a month's time, but you've identified the feed stopped. So at that point, an important step is feeds console, into the screen, and mark it as manually imported, hit save. That way, any relevant information, just in case, normally it shouldn't happen, you've made the change and you set up the new product. So say for instance it's moving to an app trade account, put in all the details, and at this point it's important that you select all the Asgard investments that are moving across into the new product, and this would flow through once you've followed the authority process and hit save. Linking the existing holdings to the new feed is very important, because otherwise all the investments are going to duplicate, and if you don't do that, then it's a matter of, again, following the process of removing the underscore ones, and it gets a lot more messier with existing feeds and when there are change of products. So bear in mind, if you've identified a product change, marking the first one as manually imported is very important. Number two, creating the new product and linking or moving the investments across to the new product is important. If unsure, do not activate the second feed till you have an actual statement to confirm. And if the new provider does not support history, the historic transactions will need to be processed manually. And of course, this information will be available in the user guide. If a bank feed is stopped, most common example is due to a change of BSB. NAB accounts are the most common ones we see where a BSB changes. bank does not advise the trustee, you're not aware, everything looks right, and normally you would not look at a BSB thinking because it was once active, it was working fine, and now all of a sudden it stopped. Whenever you see a NAB bank account or any bank account that was active and it has stopped, check the setup. Like I mentioned to you earlier, have you accidentally put it to a broker or a platform? If that's not the case, number 2, check the BSB on a recent statement. While you're doing that, if you've identified that the BSB is incorrect, go into class, update the BSB, retrieve the form from here, and click on help on this automated feed. Send an email to direct link at nab.com.au or the provider you are following it up for with the original form saying the BSB have identified that the BSB is updated. It was an active feed in class. The account seems to be active. Are you able to reactivate the feed for class? And they'll be able to assist you with it. At this stage, if you wish to, you can always raise a feed support request with us and we can do the same for you. However, it's the same turnaround time with the provider. If for some reason it does not activate when you've followed up, we are more than happy to follow up on your behalf. Another example is the account is closed. How do you identify that? Value of looking at a recent statement is always very high because you would know what's happening in that actual account. Whenever you raise a follow-up, whenever you raise a request with us, we ask for a recent statement because that confirms if there are any issues with the account or there have been any changes to the account. An account closed, it's always a good example to go into the actual bank account and see if there was a transfer out. If that's the case, you need to move on and check with the client if they've made changes or they were intending to inform you about the changes in the next client meeting. Another very rare case is where there are no active transactions. So when there are no active transactions in a bank account, like I said, very rare scenario, the feed would go on to feed no longer active status. The feed no longer active status would automatically update once there are transactions available again. It happens very rarely, but if it does, and you are confident of the setup being correct, don't worry about it. Once the actual transactions flow through again, it's going to load for you and the status would change to OK. Feed rejected by provider with status of invalid signature. Now, this is a very commonly asked question. Well, we've been talking about very commonly asked question, but this is another one that comes across where you believe the signatures are correct because you somehow confirmed them from another document you have on file. You don't wish to check with the trustees because you think it's all correct, and which is follow up with the trustees saying use this authority form and either go into a branch and verify the signature. Sometimes it's a verification process that wasn't complete while set up. Sometimes you'd be amazed that the signature on file in the bank are very different to the signatures being used for all the documents. Very rare, but it happens. And it could sometimes be the provider being extra cautious about signatures or a bad scan where they can't identify the signature. So the short answer to fix this problem is the account holder needs to go back to the provider. In my experience, if we go back to the provider with the authority form saying, are you able to assist? The answer we get is we're not authorized to act on their behalf because it's client secure data and information. So whenever you see an invalid signature status, instead of following it up with us, go back to the trustee. You'd be amazed to find that it's the verification process that was not complete while setting up the account. That brings us to the end of the webinar. Now, please feel free to, I'll leave this on for a couple more minutes. Please feel free to ask questions. And like I said, we'll be answering all these questions. I can see there are quite a few questions that have come through, and I'll get back to you with the answers as soon as possible. I'll try to club together the commonly asked questions versus specific questions, and we'll contact you accordingly. Also, you have the option to put in your questions while you're completing this survey. Please, I request you to put that through for any suggestions and improvements going forward. They always come in handy, and we'll assist you with that. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.